about to increase it. So in that one important area, it has made its way. They doubled, while I was there, they doubled their renewable energy goals. They now expect to have a renewable energy goal of 20% of total electricity by 2020. That's a goal we've not yet established in the United States. There are many other ways in which they have not yet translated into policy. I mean, India has, Montek said a very important thing. He said, if we price things at the margin. Well, they don't price things at the margin. They're still using average cost pricing. I think I know another country where we're still using average cost pricing for electricity. So both countries have a huge opportunity to increase the economic rationality of the way we deal with the energy sector. And the message was they understand that rapid change is what makes you competitive. We still seem to believe that slow change is what's going to keep us competitive. And I think that is a really fundamental error. I think we believe it. We think it's better not to disrupt the way we set up public utilities in 1930 to deal with Samuel Insull. Well, that was almost 100 years ago, and we might want to reconsider. But I don't think we've quite gotten the pace of the 21st century right yet. But the Indians haven't either. They're just a little more conscious about that.
He's way in the back.
Hey, Carl. Thank you for your comments. Tom Van Dyke, RBC. Now that the European cap and trade market has failed again, what is the solution for you? What do you think the solution is for the United States? What do we need to adopt? What are the three things we need to do to make this reality come about? You just mentioned in your speech.
That's a big question. I'll try to give a short answer. We collectively all made a big intellectual mistake 30 years ago. We listened to what the economists correctly told us, which is that economic actors will use the cheapest available source of energy. We focused on the word cheap. We made a presumption that the big thing which was sustaining our dependence on fossil fuels was the fact that we were not appropriately charging for their carbon emissions. Cap and trade, carbon taxes, all these mechanisms were based on the premise that if we just priced carbon, we would move off of it. We have now run a controlled experiment for the last 10 years in that argument. In the transportation sector, the dynamics of the oil markets have imposed a shadow price on carbon of $220 a ton. That is the difference between oil at 30 and oil at 100, which is where we've come since 2003. That $220 a ton carbon tax has produced very little behavior change in the transportation sector. On the other hand, in the utility sector, where we have had a similar shift in factor prices between coal and natural gas, you have seen a phenomenal shift in behavior. And the reason is that in the utility sector, coal and natural gas are factors that can be substituted for each other while still obtaining the same ultimate service, electricity. In the transportation sector, we've allowed oil to maintain its monopoly. So there isn't actually some other fuel, except there's three places where there are. In Brazil, Brazilian drivers have a choice between ethanol and gasoline. And when the price of gasoline goes up, they buy more ethanol. There is huge elasticity of demand for fuel in Brazil because there is fuel competition. In Europe and in a few cities in the United States where there is mass transit penetration, when the price of gasoline goes up, transit ridership soars. So in markets where urban transportation has factor substitution, markets respond to price signals. So the most important thing we need to do is to look at the other half of that thing the economists say, the cheapest available energy source. We need to figure out why we don't have choices. What are the institutional barriers What are the monopoly practices? What are the kind of path-specific investments that needed to be made at the front end? How do we need to de-risk competing with oil? But my core message is, and I think this makes both the cultural transition for business and the politics for all of us easier, not harder. We need to focus on how much clean energy we deploy, not how much dirty energy we destroy. If we put out enough solar, enough wind, enough efficiency, enough advanced biofuels, if we find ways to build buildings with half as much material and double the energy efficiency, if we can make cars that weigh a third as much, then we will solve the carbon problem, whether or not we put a tax on carbon. Now, I want to be clear, I am in favor of a tax on carbon. It is a hell of a good way to fund a government. It's a much better way of funding a government than taxing profits. But it's not a terribly effective way of decarbonizing an economy unless you first make sure that in each and every sector that matters, customers have more than one way to get the service they need. Because frankly, if you look at the graph lines of the price of oil and global aviation, as the price of oil goes up, global aviation goes up. As the price of oil goes down, air travel goes down. Both are driven by the health of the world economy. The price of oil does not deter anybody, it turns out, from taking an airline flight. But if you could take a train, or if the airlines could buy something other than oil, when oil got to be $100 a barrel, that would make a difference.
Thank you so much, Carl. Carl will be here to answer questions later on. I think we have to go to our, well, Bob Massey here asking a question later.
It's Bob Massey. You
It's
get
Bob
that?
Massey.
Carl, I have been asked to speak at a lot of college campuses recently. And I think that the mood among college students on the campuses that I've been is we don't actually care about all of this. We don't care about corporate sustainability programs. We don't care about the policy debate. What we know is the planet's being destroyed and that fossil fuel companies are contributing to that. And at lunch today, we're going to have Bill McKibben talking about his divestment campaign, which is now in a tiny amount of time swept to 300 or more campuses, thus really bringing into focus among a certain community in the U.S. the question of whether we have the kind of commitment and political fortitude to move forward. So my question to you is, do you see this growing sense of enough already, enough on the margins, enough on the excuses, which is the way I can tell you most students see it, as a contributor to moving not only this community, which is doing important things, but other communities and even the inert Congress towards taking this on? The intensity of feeling is growing. The first sit-in took place in Rhode Island on Monday. I think there are going to be more. And I think the political context gradually will change in the United States in which this debate is taking place.
Well, I think that's true. But I want to emphasize that you need two things to move from the economy we have today to the economy we need tomorrow. You need intensity, and we have lacked intensity. And I think it is likely to come out of the campuses, but I'm probably biased there because I was part of the 60s generation that provided the intensity for the civil rights movement. So I believe in that as a force for cultural and social change. But you also need direction. And to go back to the civil rights movement, when I was the field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we were going through the summer of Selma, we wanted Lyndon Johnson basically to restore the federal occupation of the South. We wanted federal marshals in every courthouse in the South. That was our desired solution. Lyndon Johnson took a different, and it turned out a much more strategic pathway. Lyndon Johnson said, let's just give African Americans the vote and watch politicians behave like politicians. Cowardly. And Lyndon Johnson was right. He had the right strategy. So we need to have the intensity, but we also need to think, and that's a job where I think we need leadership from the business community, to think about what's the fastest pathway to reduce our dependence on carbon, but also on stuff. Because you look at the numbers. World GDP in terms of services provided to people is likely to quintuple by 2050. World consumption, both of carbon and everything else that we extract from the planet, needs to be cut by at least 50%. 2 times 5 is 10. We need to get a unit of value into the pockets of a customer in 2050 with 1/10 the material impact that we do today. That's where you guys come in.